The Big Ten and SEC are forming another alliance, basically. How does it affect Utah? Let's discuss on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We are available on all platforms, including YouTube and wherever you may get your podcast. If this is your first time listening to our show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you on YouTube as well as on X, where you can follow our show at Locked On Utes. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can make every moment more. New customers can join today and you get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to be joined on today's show by James Peterson of ESPN 700. And James, when talking about the future of the college football playoff, the SEC and Big Ten are, of course, at the forefront of it. I mean, outside of Clemson, no one has won it from any other conference other than those two. Basically, it's been those two sides have dominated everything. Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama, Georgia, the brands that those are, and they just added Texas, those school conferences, Texas, Oklahoma, USC, all these other ones going in, like they're going to control the future of it. So, and the commissioners for the first time in a long time are actually a little bit buddy-buddy. So you get Greg Sankey and then Petiti, as well as the Big Ten guy. They're forming this little kind of an alliance together. And we saw last time how these kind of things can work out. Like they're never for sure with what happened with the Pac-12, the ACC, and also, of course, the Big Ten, what they kind of ended up doing. But with this kind of thing, this one feels different because they are both like A and B and like 1A, 1B and the power structure of things. Like they have the potential to really change the future of the college football sport. So to me, this definitely affects Utah because the implications of whatever college football, the future, just like the title, all of that will be decided by these two conferences because they hold all the cards. So this is significant news for Utah to me.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, anything that the SEC and Big Ten does, for better or worse, is going to affect the rest of college football for sure. And this is no different.
Yeah, it's no different at all. And it's just such an interesting world now we live in where the schools have so much power versus it used to be with the NCAA now. And what's nice for Utah is we'll talk about more in the second segment. The short-term future, Utah is sitting in a really strong spot. When you look at it, like the next few years, that's where I don't really see right now. Things can always change. We didn't think there would be only four Power 4 conferences next year, and now here we are. But it feels like the next 8 years is what should still be the 12-team playoff in the format. But even just reading in on the reporting like this, like what's nice is at least as it stands right now, I always envision the winner of the Big 12, one of the four power conferences still, will get in. But what's interesting is how are other qualifiers going to work when years where obviously the SEC and Big Ten are going to want to get more members. And it definitely feels like for Utah, your best bet to continue to get in is going to be winning the college football playoff, because we know as well, I do think these committees do a pretty good job. I mean, heck, Mark Harlan is literally on the college football playoff committee. So that's one thing that definitely helps Utah. But it does feel like one of those things too, where as these things get more drastic in terms of all the big brands in the other conferences, more committee members are going to be trying to poke holes into Utah's resume in the future, right? Where it's they beat up on a Big 12 teams. How would they do in an SEC or a Big 10 schedule? I just feel like that's something that's going to be brought up there, where that could potentially be a negative thing for Utah going forward.
Yeah, potentially. I'd like to think that they're going to have the committee's going to have a little bit more integrity with that sort of thing, to not just say, hey, the Big 12 champion can't be as good as the Big 10 and SEC. But human nature tells you that that's probably going to happen more often than not. And same thing for ACC champion. Unfortunately, ACC and Big 12 are probably going to be looked at as the lesser conferences there. They certainly will be in the media. You'd hope that they wouldn't be in the committee, but that you'd be a fool if you think that wouldn't happen in some years. So, I think that you should probably anticipate some of that, but like you were saying, is if Utah can take care of business every year and win the Big 12 or get to the Big 12 championship game, they probably shouldn't have too much to worry about as far as how the committee sees them in comparison to other Big 10 or SEC teams. And as long as Kyle Whittingham is there, as long as they continue to do what they've done in the transfer portal and continue to improve their recruiting classes like they've done these last few years, while they've been on these runs to the Pac-12 championship game, winning Pac-12 championships, you got to expect them to at least be in the running to win the Big 12 every year, if not win it every year. So I think as long as they're in that as long as they're in that range of things, Utah fans shouldn't have too much to worry about as far as how they look in the eyes of the committee.
Yeah, the interesting thing will be, to your point, if you win the conference, you'll get in, especially because the conversations are more so towards expanding it for those extra spots. So that's where you think it would benefit a Utah. But where I'm very curious is like if Utah's a 2-loss non-conference champion versus Big Ten and SEC 2-loss non-conference champions, that's when those discussions will get really interesting, because more than likely, because of the state of the Big 12 is in right now, the SEC or Big Ten team will very likely have better ranked wins. So that's where, and if it's like a 3-loss team, like, man, could you imagine if we had the 12-team playoff format this last year? Like Oklahoma was in at 12, so they would have made it. But right behind them was LSU. LSU's losses were Florida State at full strength, Alabama, and Ole Miss. Like all three of those teams being playoff teams versus Oklahoma. I'm sure there may be an Oklahoma State fan or two randomly watching for some reason, but you never know. Like that was one of their losses, which wasn't a great loss. And then I'm blanking on Oklahoma's other loss. Obviously, they had the great win against Texas. There was another loss in
Kansas.
Hey, wow, great, yeah, great pull. Yeah. It was Kansas. So like things like
I don't know why that's on the top of my head.
Hey, who is it? I still just can't. I think the reason it wasn't on mine is I still can't get over Kansas being a football school as they've got it. Well, I guess they won a national championship a few years ago. So they're doing a good job with both. I mean, their head coach literally just declined the Washington job. Like, just say that out loud. Like Kansas football head coach just declined. Crazy world we live in. But just staying with this as well, it is like that's what will be interesting to see is kind of when things get like, well, hey, even though this SEC team has 3 losses, like they played a tougher schedule than this team. So that's where I think it's going to get interesting for Utah. But as we said, too, what's nice for Utah as of right now is as long as they win their conference, they'll be in a good position too. And still, I like to believe the committee will most of the time reward that Utah 2-loss team. Like, I don't worry about Utah being the next Florida State, really, James, because like, if you get injuries up to that point, like that's where if it's that bad as the ones they were, I understood the committee's decision to not put Florida State in like that if the injuries get to a standpoint where it's that brutal of a thing. But this is just going to be fascinating to watch and see how it plays out, because the SEC and the Big Ten do hold so much of the cards. But like we said, this is where Mark Harlan and all the other commissioners and members of this committee can come in and make it fair and balanced. But this does feel like a long-term thing, because I'll throw one last thing at you, James, here. I still feel like eventually, I agree with Kyle Whittingham, I think we're heading for super conferences eventually. So I think that's where it's best for Utah to continue to try to win, because if we get to that point, and I know they have a contract with the Big 12 and everything like that, but if there's a chance to join a super conference like that because they've elevated their brand to that, I just think it's going to be hard to say no to that.
Yeah, you'd be crazy not to jump to a better conference if and when that happens. I was actually talking about this with our mutual friend Brian Brown on my show Sports Saturday last week about how you would hope that this new Big 12 gets more than 3 to 5 years to try to develop these rivalries and develop these this competition between a lot of schools or a good number of schools that aren't used to facing each other at this point. And obviously a conference that's kind of in flux. They lost the Big 12, losing their 2 major powers to the SEC in Texas and Oklahoma, and trying to figure out if Utah's the major power, how is that going to look for the conference? How do they market that? They're so used to marketing Texas and Oklahoma, those sorts of things. You would hope that they get the benefit. The Big 12 gets a benefit enough time to develop those kinds of things. But to what you just said, Kyle Whittingham's been all over this, and so many others have followed suit and saying that you'd be crazy if you thought that we're not going to have a ton more realignment in the near future. And so it definitely behooves Utah to make sure that they're near the top of the conference, if not dominating this conference, so that by the time that happens again, they get invited to the party, right? That's kind of where we are today. You don't want to be the last one picked on the playground. You don't want to be the one without an invite, and that's kind of where we are when it comes to realignment. If you're not getting the super conference invite that might be the case in a few years here, you're probably going to get left out in the dust.
You absolutely are. And, you mentioned Utah dominating the conference. That will, of course, start in 2024, and they have a very favorable schedule. Want to talk about that schedule and how Utah is set up for short-term success in the college football playoffs. So eventually, when down the road something might happen, they could be in a position to capitalize on a super conference spot opening up potentially. Want to dive into that thought a little more with you all in one moment. But first, I want to talk to you about our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. FanDuel has so many ways for you guys to end your season with a dub or 2 or 3, because not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which player will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. New customers can join today and you get $200 in bonus bets. If your first bet of $5 or more wins, just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And James, the line for the game right now still sits with the 49ers as a slight favorite, 2.5 at the moment. Where you're leaning for the Super Bowl?
I'm leaning Niners, but I don't feel
you're leaning
crazy
Niners.
comfortable about that, because we've seen this entire playoff run that even if they're not exactly living up to the standard that they've set in years past, this Chiefs team still has that championship DNA to win every game that they can play. So I'm leaning Niners just because, and the reason why is because they basically have the best roster in the NFL, and they have for the last few years. And I just kind of feel like, as much as people are saying that Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid and their greatness can win out, I'm like, how can you go against that kind of talent that the Niners have? But yeah, like I said, I would not be surprised if Mahomes and Andy Reid and that Chiefs defense, not shock people, but end up pulling out a game that it looks like they probably shouldn't win, and winning the Super Bowl champion and winning another Super Bowl. So yeah, leaning Niners, but wouldn't be surprised if Chiefs pull it out.
It's a tough one to predict. I mean, I'm going to roll with the Chiefs simply for the fact that I thought the Ravens were supposed to beat them. I thought the Bills were supposed to beat them. Like, obviously, I didn't think the Dolphins were going to beat them because that was just a bad matchup. But I thought everyone else was going to beat them, and they found a way. I'm leaning Chiefs right now. So if you guys want to get in at the action, whether it's the game itself or the other bets, make sure you head over to FanDuel today. I would take the Chiefs to cover. James is leading 49ers. Let us know what you guys think below, and visit FanDuel today. James, one thing that Utah has at least going for them as it relates to the future of college football is the immediate future of college football, because we know next year it's 12-team playoff, and all Utah has to do to make that 12-team playoff is do what they've done 2 of the last 3 years. Is that easier said than done? Absolutely. But how can you not look at this schedule and go, man, they're set up for it? I mean, the only game right now they might not be favored in is the game at Oklahoma State. But even I've said before, I don't think that's a great matchup for Oklahoma State because Ollie Gordon's a beast. It's a top 5 rushing defense coming into their house. And I just like to trust Kyle Whittingham in a game of this magnitude. Yes, I know Utah's dropped some games on the road, but they've been to really good quarterbacks. Not Bowman. This is a guy who had 15 touchdowns to 14 interceptions last year, who lost to South Alabama at home. I'm sorry. I know you guys made the Big 12 championship game. I can't get past that if you're that level. Because, yes, like I said, Utah's had some disappointing losses, but they ain't had a South Alabama loss to that level. So I just still think this schedule sets up so favorably for Utah, where we can worry about the long-term future. But as it relates to next year, James, Utah should be in the college football playoff.
I think so. I think as long as they can get past that 2-game stretch at the beginning of the Pac-12 season, or the Big 12 season, excuse me, I got to get used to saying Big 12 now. The beginning of the Big 12 conference season, they have Oklahoma State, as you mentioned, in Stillwater to open Big 12 play, and then the very next week they have Arizona, which it looked like wasn't going to be quite as tough as an opponent as last year with when we heard Jed Fish was leaving for Washington, but obviously McMillan and Fafita are back, so that'll probably still be a really tough opponent. If they can get out of there with just one loss, obviously if they can get out of there undefeated, the rest of the schedule sets up really nicely. I want to give TCU a little bit of the benefit of the doubt that they might improve next year, but that being said, Utah's roster and we talked about the Chiefs championship DNA in that last ad there for talking about the Super Bowl.
Yeah,
this Utah roster has that too, and you even if TCU has a nice bounce back year, that one is at Rice-Eccles Stadium, and so you'd expect Utah to find a way to win that game. But beyond that one, but beyond those two and maybe the TCU game, I just don't see many challenging games on this schedule. Obviously, the rivalry game can go either way. Yep. Usually goes either way, but that on paper, Utah has a much stronger roster than BYU. You'd expect that to be a win as well at Rice-Eccles Stadium. So it really is, if you can at least split against Oklahoma State and Arizona, which may not be able to, but if you can at least split that one, then it should be smooth sailing it to the Big 12 championship game at the very least, and then we'll see what happens in the championship game there. But yeah, I'm with you. I think it's a very favorable schedule. It's really only those first 2 games that kind of give you pause.
It is, because I mean, and also like even saying like just Utah is so good at home, right? Like what they do to these teams is like UCLA, like yes, Dante Moore, there's a reason he's now a backup at Oregon. But, like, man, I mean, to get one touchdown and even the way that whole drive played out was crazy. Like, the Arizona State game, like, I know they had injuries at quarterback, but dang, like, Utah just what they do to teams at home. And, like, yes, Bo Nix came in and beat them. 2 things. 1, Bo Nix was a Heisman finalist last year. It's a heck of a quarterback right there. 2, Cam Rising didn't play in that game. So, with Utah's main starting quarterback, they haven't lost at home since 2018. So that's where it's hard. Like you mentioned at TCU, that's where it's tough for me to get there. I give Arizona more of a chance because I know this type of game you need from your quarterback. And like we said, too, even Utah's road schedule, right? Like I'm not scared to go to Arizona State or Houston UCF. Like it'd be different if it was in August again and we had to do that thing all over again when we saw how awful that Utah defense played in the heat. But give me Florida in December. Absolutely. The only other game I look at, and when I actually did my schedule last week, like I needed to find a loss. The one matchup I don't love for Utah, and I know how crazy it would be, James, but I just don't. The one matchup that I know Cam Rising is going to go into, and he's not going to be the better quarterback on the field, is against Colorado. So the question is, can that slightly improved offensive line, or slightly improved, much improved, that remains to be seen. But I think Shedeur Sanders is incredible. I think he's going to be the first pick in the 2025 NFL draft. I think they got legit receivers on the outside. So when I did Utah's schedule, like it's not a game that Utah should lose to me. But last week I did give him the loss there just because I think Shedeur can have that type of performance. I like some of the things that Colorado is still building up there. I'll say it again. Utah should not lose that game to me, but I just feel like a loss, if it's going to come, is probably going to come on the road. And there's just not a lot of tough road games outside of the Oklahoma State one. So it really is tough to find those losses where if they get to the Big 12 championship game, as we discussed, it should be really well set up for Utah to make the college football playoff, which would just be, and if they win the Big 12 championship, hosting a game, which is just something that James is so tremendous to think about the possibility of.
Oh yeah, Rice-Eccles Stadium in a playoff game. I mean, that'd be incredible. But yeah, I think I'd still say even with what you said, and I don't disagree with how Utah is definitely matches up really well against Oklahoma State. I'd still say that that's the one that if you had to pick a loss, that's the one that I would pick. But to your point with Colorado, Shedeur Sanders is probably he's definitely the more he's the quarterback that can make a little more spectacular plays than Cam Rising. I would say that with what Cam's done in his college career, I don't know that I would go to say that Cam wouldn't be wouldn't be looked at as better than Shedeur Sanders.
Okay.
But Shedeur Sanders,
Okay.
I mean, talent-wise, I mean, he's definitely got all the tools and could really break a game open. We saw last year against TCU, for example.
In Arizona too. He almost did.
Yeah. So I if you're saying that because Utah matches up really well against the Oklahoma State defense in that game there, I would then Colorado might be that game. The rivalry game could be that game though, because of how close that usually is every year.
Great point you made. Yep.
I mean, that's another one though. Like Colorado, you look at the rosters and go, okay, Utah should win this one.
Yes.
No way I would pick against them. But if you had to pick a loss when you can't really see one on the schedule, I mean, usually the surprising losses usually come against your biggest rival, and we've seen how close that game is throughout in recent years, even when Utah was winning 10, 11, 12 straight. So that might be one to pick if you're saying that they get past Arizona and Oklahoma State unscathed. I might go with Colorado or BYU, but I'm with you. Even though maybe you're predicting it just because you have to pick a loss there, when it comes down to it that week, you're like, I don't know if Utah's going to stumble against that team, but it's like my boss at ESPN 700 always says, Bill Riley, you can't predict an undefeated season. Right?
You can't.
You have to anticipate that there's one slip up against a team that maybe you should have beaten, or maybe you underestimate a really good team like Arizona or Oklahoma State, and you overestimate Utah's ability against a really good team like that. So I don't know that I kind of lean that way too with Bill Riley, that you can't predict an undefeated season, but it's hard to find losses on this schedule because it does, outside of those first two games, they really don't have it. It doesn't really look like they have an opponent that's anywhere near as good as them.
It's true. I mean, I'm pretty confident every single game going into the week of it. When I do these show previews come the fall, I'm going to pick Utah to win. That, like, the week of that game, I'll say I think Utah's going to win here. I think Utah's going to win here. But like we said, you can't predict an undefeated season, especially when Utah hasn't gone undefeated. This weird things happen in college football. That's how it works. So it's going to be fascinating to see how Utah handles this schedule. And one thing I'm excited, speaking of schedules, to see how the Utah women's basketball team handles the upcoming difficult challenge that they have with a top-ranked Oregon State team coming into town. Want to dive into that matchup and talk about what to expect from the Utah women's basketball team in that game in one moment. But first, want to talk to you a little bit about one of our sponsors of today's episode of Locked On Utes, our friends at UCCU. Learn and Earn, the UCCU mobile banking app that pays your entire family to learn about money. Kids look to parents to become more financially literate. Parents don't always know the answers. Learn and Earn breaks down financial topics into fun, bite-sized educational games like quizzes and trivia. Every time a family member completes a topic, they earn points that can occur and can be redeemed for gift cards to stores like Amazon, Apple, Sephora, Walmart, Nike, and more. There is age-appropriate content for every member of the family who can compete against each other and track their progress on leaderboards. Learn and Earn is inside the UCCU mobile banking app, so play it anytime, anywhere. The more you play, the more you learn. And the more you learn, the more you earn. Learn and Earn, part of UCCU's award-winning Bean Money Smart Youth Banking Program, helping kids, teens, and parents have fun while becoming more financially literate together. UCCU, love where you bank. All right, James, talk about the Utah women's basketball team. They suffered a tough loss recently to Oregon State. They dropped that one 91-66. That was one where Utah just could not get it going. They only scored a combined 23 points in the second and third quarter. And while they had a big fourth quarter where they scored 24, I mean, you still lose 91-66. So the game was really out of reach. They did a good job on Alyssa Peely. She was 13-28 from the field overall. And it was just one of those disappointing road ones. But I will say, there's a reason Oregon State was ranked in that one, and they're still currently ranked as a top 17 team. So it's going to be a big test for Utah. It's one they're going to need a lot from. Alyssa Peely, their star, Jenna Johnson stepping up too. But this is a team that, even though they've lost Gianna Neepkin, they have multiple players who are capable of getting it done. I'm excited to see how this one plays out. But I do like the Utes to find a way to get a home win because they've been pretty strong at home on the season. I know they had the stumble against Stanford, but that's a good Stanford team as well too. Like, I just feel like this team you kind of figured some things out as of recently, and I'm going to roll with one of the best players in women's college basketball, Alyssa Peely.
Yeah, I think that they bounce back and get a win. This is a good Oregon State team, though.
Yeah.
Reagan Beers, their big is a load inside. She's kind of their Alyssa Peely, if you will.
Yeah, it's a good matchup.
And that should be a really good star matchup there. They also have former Ute Kelsey Reese, who is all of a sudden a 3-point sharpshooter. I mean, she's shooting over 40% from three. So anyway, it's a tough team. They put 91 on them in Corvallis, but as you said, this Utah team is tough to beat at the Huntsman Center. So I expect a bounce back win. It'll probably be a close one because Oregon State is that good, but I expect a bounce back win for Utah coming up on Friday.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to see how it plays out. And James, we greatly appreciate you coming on and joining us here. If people want more Utah sports talk, especially on their Saturdays, as you mentioned, where should they head over to?
ESPN 700, which, if you're in Salt Lake City, 700 AM, 92.1 FM, our new FM signal. Also, if you're outside of the market, download the ESPN 700 app, your preferred app store, and you can listen live that way or to the podcast.
Awesome. Well, James, thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes. Hope you all have a fantastic Super Bowl weekend. Let us know your game predictions below, and we look forward to talking all things Utah athletics with you next week. We'll see you then.